Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Invest Africa. I'm Alicia Second. Well, Johannesburg is regarded as the commercial and economic capital of the African continent. The MMC for Finance of the City of Johannesburg recently tabled an ambitious budget worth 43.8 million rand, and that to tackle existing and future city requirements. But the city's soaring wage bill continues to be a concern. Philani Nyalunga filed this report.
We appropriated in council 44 billion rands. 7.5 billion rands thereof is for capital expenditure and the remainder is for operating expenses. What's important about the capital expenditure is that it grew by 60% compared to the current year, which is the 2012-2013 year. We believe that it's a budget that is going to take Johannesburg to a higher level.
The City of Johannesburg is regarded as a world-class city. It's also one of the largest contributors to the South African economy. According to the city's Growth and Development Strategy 2040, the city currently generates 16% of South Africa's GDP and accounts for 40% of the province's economic activity. However, the city's increasing remuneration bill remains a challenge. According to experts, its wage bill needs to be cut down as it could have a significant impact on the city's ability to generate revenue. Another challenge the city continues to face is the billing crisis, where according to media reports, thousands of residents have either not received their monthly billing accounts or getting substantially inflated ones. This has caused countless cut-offs and also a drop in the collection of revenue.
Correct billing. Billing has to be correct. One of them is that we have to have a clean audit because we have to create really confidence in the minds of the investors that we really run our finances well. The other is to reduce the amount of salaries as a percentage of operating expenses. We are now sitting at around 34%. We want to reduce it to around 30%. Why is it important to do that? It's because you can't be earning money and spending it on yourselves. You have to pay yourselves less and spend the rest of the money on the citizens of Johannesburg.
Just like any other city, transportation has had a profound impact on the City of Johannesburg. However, with the city's 2013-2014 budget, changes are to be made on the city's key priority areas, and that includes the transport system.
Our major big program is the development of the corridors of freedom, which is really a very exciting development that's going to take place starting this financial year and really going into the future up to 2030. What we're going to be doing is taking the bus rapid transport routes as a backbone. Think of those bus rapid transit routes linking, for instance, Soweto to the inner city to Alex, linking Alex to Sandton, and basically getting rid of the whole apartheid model that the city currently has.
Johannesburg is one of the world's class cities and Africa's commercial hub. But there are changes that need to be made to make Joburg a city that's livable, sustainable and resilient. The city needs to be able to address its issues if it hopes to live up to its residents' expectations and its economic potential. Philani Nyalunga, CNBC Africa, Johannesburg.
Well, joining me in studio today to take a closer look at the City of Johannesburg as Africa's leading investment and commercial hub is Keith Brebnor. He's director at the Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We've got Martyn Davies as well, CEO of Frontier Advisory, with us at the desk today. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me. Well, in a recent debate that I hosted on megacities, I came across an interesting quote by A.T. Kearney in the 2012 Global Cities Index, and it said, "The world today is more about cities than it is about countries." Martyn, to what extent does that ring true in an African context where certainly it's only now that I think foreign investors are starting to differentiate between the countries themselves?
Well, you always have these arguments in Africa about whether the borders are artificial or real. Well, clearly, if we accept they may be artificial in many cases, then cities rise in importance. I think going forward for Johannesburg specifically, there's a competition almost. Every hub, every region needs a hub The hub for East Africa is Nairobi, of competition from Addis Ababa, perhaps. Undoubtedly, Johannesburg's the hub for Southern Africa. West Africa's, I don't think there may be Accra, maybe Lagos. There's infrastructure constraints on both, obviously. Francophone Africa, Paris is the hub. But Dubai, arguably, is the new Africa hub, with 60 flights a week coming into SA, I believe. So if we claim to be this gateway, at the very least a transactional platform, considering the competitiveness of our capital markets, our financial services sector, we certainly have rising competition as a city of Johannesburg. So we need to step up to this. And rather than countries competing, in this context, cities undoubtedly competing.
Looking at the status as it stands right now, Keith, we've got a hub that generates 16% of South Africa's wealth. It employs 12% of the national workforce, and some 74% of South African companies have their headquarters based here. Yet by the strict definition of what constitutes a megacity, Johannesburg isn't one of Africa's mega cities. Do we have to look more so at tone as opposed to, strict and specific figures regarding these labels?
Well, remembering the history, Johannesburg was founded on gold. It had around it on the Witwatersrand other cities spring up. Brakpan, Benoni, Springs, going right up to Carltonville and Randfontein. So in reality, Johannesburg is much bigger than just the boundaries of Johannesburg. There's no way that it ends just at Bedford View. And the factories of the East Rand were totally linked to the gold mines in Johannesburg. Mm-hmm. So if we really got to talk about population and data and numbers, I think Johannesburg really should be a city region type area, which is probably 3/4 of Gauteng. Now, in the plans for the city region, they were talking about even including countries or places like Sasolburg in the city region to make it much more competitive with Ile-de-France and the other great metropolises of the world.
Yeah, it's going to be very hard to take a look then at how exactly Johannesburg is contributing to the national coffers, to that GDP specifically. So let's look at Gauteng as a province itself. How that's contributing to national GDP, the contribution we're looking at from a city like Johannesburg.
Well, being where it is one of its major features. Most cities founded on gold disappeared once the gold ran out. This didn't happen with Johannesburg because of our position. As you know, we're the biggest city not on a national or natural transportation route. And normally Johannesburg, being 6,000 feet up as well, would have actually faded away when the gold mines faded. But because it's positioned so high up into South Africa's region, and it's the springboard into Africa. Mm-hmm. So from Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce's point of view, we got founded 4 years after the city was founded. We realized very clearly then that we'd be the springboard because of the mines and because of the export and the trade that we're going to do with the rest of the world in Africa. And then, of course, with the big airport and all of that, we grew and grew into that. Normally, we're lucky to be where we are at this moment.
Yeah. Given that status then, how do we adequately leverage off this position, Martyn? Urban planning has got to be key here. How are you rating stride being made in that regard, especially where setting up of infrastructure, public works, transportation should form one of those key pillars because it's needed to be supportive of sustained and a higher growth moving forward.
You mentioned sustained, and picking up what Keith said, Johannesburg arguably is the greatest example of sustainable development ever. Started life just over a century ago as a small, dusty gold mining town. Mm-hmm. Today is the engine room, be it Johannesburg or Gauteng, is the engine room undoubtedly of the continent. The antithesis of Johannesburg would be Kimberley, where it was the center of the global diamond trade over a century ago, and what is left today? A hole and nothing much else. So Johannesburg is the prime example of the true sustainable development, I would argue, and diversification. Mm-hmm. To your point, I think what does Johannesburg need to do more of going forward, particularly in the light of robust growth in Africa? This presents a phenomenal opportunity. We're almost servicing the region as we are to an extent, as Hong Kong would service South China, as Singapore would service Southeast Asia. Johannesburg needs to step up to the plate a little bit more to compete and act in the same sort of conduit.
As you say, with that rising competition, we cannot be complacent. We cannot.
But what we need to do is, of course, connectivity and infrastructure is obvious. We all know that. But beyond that, what I would like to see, and this is maybe a clash of policy interests between central government and city management, is we need to see the city become a default natural home for Fortune 500 companies and leading multinationals globally, to set up their Africa headquarters here in Johannesburg, taking advantage of the infrastructure, be it airline, be it broadband connectivity, whatever it may be. But how do we get those companies here? We should not expect them because there's not much competition in our region. Clearly Mozambique, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe are not competing with us. Our competition traditionally has been a minimum 9 hours flight away, perhaps to India, to Europe, and perhaps to Latin America. The competition is coming closer, those cities I mentioned. And ironically, much of our competition for the Africa default hub is coming from outside the continent, as mentioned, Dubai, Paris, even London perhaps. So we need to compete and offer the policy incentives, be it tax, whatever it may be, to get these multinationals headquartered here in Johannesburg.
Is enough incentive from a policy perspective being put on the table?
Well, up until 5 years ago there was, and all the head offices were moving into Johannesburg. But over the last 4 years, with, as Martyn says, the increase of our neighbouring territories and the fact that it's not that easy and we're not being as natural a springboard as we should be, people are starting to look and starting to say, instead of using Joburg as a springboard, let's actually set up in Angola or Mozambique or Zimbabwe even. And that's very worrying. So we've got to reclaim that space, and we've got to become more competitive.
In
no
that
question.
reclamation, let's take a look at some of the initiatives that have come to the fore. I mean, you've got to look at cost of doing business in any territory. That is front of mind for any investor. And we've got investment being made in technology, for example, to the amount of 44 million rand. It's allocated towards a fiber optic infrastructure for broadband network. We've had the ratio for business tariffs having been reduced from 3.5% to 3% as well. What do you think of incentives like these that are being put on the table?
Well, I think those are musts. I mean, we just have to do it, except they've been talking about this broadband project for 5 years now. We actually have to move on these things. We cannot sit back. Our competitiveness is dropping. Our gateway status is being lost. And in fact, it's because of not taking ownership as city itself and listening to province and national, rather than saying, look, this is our city, we have to run it, we've got to lead the way over the other cities in South Africa. When we had the Imbiza with President Mbeki in 2007, we laid on the table from the Chambers of Commerce and all the chambers around Joburg exactly what was needed in the terms of skills, transport, broadband, etc. Now that was 6 years ago, and not a lot's been done. Okay, the BRT was started, but that was forced on them because of the World Cup. So we're saying you've got to look at trade. We're a trading centre. JCCR sees it. Most of our members are moving into exporting into Africa, and we actually have to have our city play the part of a leader.
Martyn, when I asked the question, I could sense that you're not one of those that are convinced by the kind of plans that are being tabled and just how effectively it's going to be implemented at the end of the day.
Like, I think, everyone who comes to Johannesburg is immediately impressed by the hard infrastructure we have. The airport is fantastic, and it's even beyond a first world European status in many instances. You go to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, you feel you're in a third world country effectively. That's nothing like OR Tambo. We have fantastic infrastructure. What I'm referring to, I would like to see, and this is not so much a city debate as it is a central government one, is tax incentives. For example, Singapore would have a flat corporate tax rate of 15%. If you go in, it's not about employment creation, it's about intellectual property contribution. That tax rate is highly negotiable, depending on who you are and what contribution you're making to the city-state.
Are there not dangers that are inherently linked to putting incentives like those forward?
I think it's too short-termist. This is not just a Johannesburg story. This could be an IDZ story, soon to be SEZ story as well in our country. Is the greater tax incentives incentivize business to locate to the specific region. We're on the southern tip of Africa. We are not on a Chinese coast. We're not in Southeast Asia. We're not in sort of around Dubai, UAE area. We need to put in place those softer policy incentives around tax incentives. Companies, and don't look at narrowly saying, well, what are we going to get from this company in terms of tax? Companies, multinationals locate, They bring in their supply chain with them, they create jobs. The spin-offs for downstream benefits, even upstream benefits, and many multinational companies' investments are incredible for an economy. And it's mostly around, beyond just looking at simple jobs created directly or tax revenue paid directly, it's more about the broader benefits these investments and these companies, and not so much for capital or for employment, but the IP that comes with it.